We're looking at some photos of the Cathedral of Notre Dame at Chartres. So, a quick note to begin. Notre Dame means Our Lady. And here's a good reason why you needed to learn that the name of a church is the person it's dedicated to, Our Lady, but also the place, Chartres. That's because there are about a gazillion Notre Dame cathedrals in France. There's the famous Notre Dame in Paris, which is the cathedral that is the setting for the Hunchback of Notre Dame. This is not in Paris, it's in Chartres, a city, a town outside Paris. But it's often thought of as kind of one of the quintessential sort of examples of what Gothic is all about. It's built shortly after Abbot Suger basically conceives of this Gothic style. And so it's an example of how that conception reaches its most full flowering. And it does that pretty much right after he invents it. If you look here, the dates are confusing. I have a number of dates here. West facade begun circa 1134. That's before the Abbey Church of Saint-Denis renovations are completed. And then the cathedral is rebuilt after a fire in 1194. So these cathedrals were often built over generations. They're massive projects, huge undertakings. And in the situation with Chartres, the interesting thing is they'd actually completed a renovation, as it says here, the west portal, before Gothic becomes kind of the standard for great sacred architecture. Then there's a fire, and they rebuild the cathedral to be an extraordinary example of the French style, the royal style, the Gothic style. Here we're pointing out two ways that Chartres is a quintessential example of Gothic. For one thing, it's embedded in a town, in a city. It's not a rural monastery. Now, it is very much a world unto itself. The cathedral is a sort of complete heavenly world, but it's really part of the urban infrastructure of Chartres. And the other reason it's very much it's a great example of Gothic is because it's very involved with and inspired by what is called the cult of the Virgin Mary. Cult here is used the way anthropologists use the term. Anthropologists use the term cult just to mean a culture, a subculture. It doesn't mean what we use the word to mean in the modern day, which is some fringe lunatic belief that's sort of dangerous and disturbing. No, it just means a belief system in which the Virgin Mary is important. And so it's very important that as this belief system becomes prominent, the Chartres Cathedral has this amazing relic, the garment worn by Mary. So Gothic cathedrals are still about relics, reliquaries, and pilgrimage, but they're about envisioning the heavenly space for those items in a different architectural language. So one of the ways that Chartres achieves what Gothic can most fully be is that the nave so beautifully creates a vast, delicate space in which the stone supports seem to be mere skeletal structures, delicate rather than heavy, and they open up the maximum amount of space for stained glass and the jeweled light that comes in. Notice that you have a three-part elevation here, which you know is made possible by the ribbed groin vaults, the pointed arches, which are channeling the weight of that stone vault directly down through the piers, which have become very sort of delicate with their little colonnettes. And because you have that engineering, the three stories include a very tall arcade and then a gallery that has become quite short, quite small, so that the clearest story can be huge, which means that this clerestory becomes an occasion for grand and gorgeous windows that are shaped in a lancette shape, this kind of sword shape, and also in round, foliate, flower-like forms. So the stonemason architects at Chartres have really made the full use of verticality and a vertical sweep, a vertical direction that feels like there's a lifting towards heaven, and that's repeated in the form of the glass, it's repeated in the vault, and it's repeated in the elevation. One of the things that stonemasons are doing as the Gothic takes off is they're figuring out how to get taller, but also how to design the elevation so that vertical composition is as beautiful and well-balanced and harmonious as can be. So some of these earlier churches, Lyon and the Church of Notre Dame at Paris, are figuring out, well, maybe we'll have four layers, four stories in the elevation. At Chartres, which is here number C, there's a kind of clarity that comes with choosing three, which is also, of course, perfectly evocative of Christianity's the Trinity. And then you have that sense of the symbolic power of three repeated in the clerestory, which has two lancettes balancing a third rose window. That is going to become sort of the ideal design, and although some cathedrals will get taller with it and more complex, it's at Chartres that reaches a kind of perfect balance. So here are a few notes to help you kind of spend some time absorbing what the elevation is all about. I'm emphasizing the clerestory being particularly elongated, the triple windows. It is actually as tall as the arcade. That's part of the balance. This, what you had learned to call the gallery, will now be called the triforium. It's still a gallery, but it has a three-arched rhythm. Therefore, the triforium, the three lobes, as it were. And of course, we have to just re-inscribe, underscore, highlight that the impression of height is amazing here. Because you have this ribbed groin vault allowing for a space that's really tall, but then the open space from side to side feels really vast along with that height. It is 120 feet high, and I put 3 exclamation points because for a medieval person, this would have been unimaginable to have a building this high. There would be no other structure in their ordinary lives that meets this grand feeling. And I'm comparing Durham, I think it's actually 78 feet high. I think that's a typo. Nevertheless, we're talking about a significant difference. And so the rose windows that are arrayed above lancettes are another example of the Gothic cathedral's ornamental complexity being balanced with a kind of delicate rhythm that makes all that complexity feel harmonious. And I want you to read closely in the textbook what they talk about, what's represented in the rose windows, which includes very important religious symbolism, but also the royal symbolism of the royal symbols for the family lines of the French kings and the queens who are related to the Spanish family line, the Castile line, and then the biblical kings and queens who are repeated throughout Chartres, so that this thematics of royalty and religion reminds us why this style is very much about royal splendor as well as divine glory. So do read carefully here about stained glass. The statistics are awe-inspiring. 22,000 square feet of stained glass in 176 windows. Think of the workmanship, think of the time, think of the labor and materials, because you were already introduced to that with the manuscripts, but here you have delicate glass. And these windows, they function both as a macrocosm with these beautiful patterns of curving shapes and intricate geometric shapes, but then they also have all of these sacred stories that are playing off each other as parables, and they are meant to be experienced as microcosms and macrocosms in the cathedral. So do make sure to look closely at the intricate detail that goes into the sacred storytelling, the way the figures are represented, as well as the overall effect of these magnificent ensembles of glass, light, color, form,